Hey everyone, Simon here. Today's guest is SongCave Studios owner and musician Eliot Reynolds, and this is The Music Instinct. This episode is coming to you from SongCave Studios in the heart of the Blue Mountains, New South Wales, Australia. Check the description for more info. Shout out to Lenovo for their excellent Creator Series laptops and Rode microphones for the amazing Wireless Go systems. Eliot, welcome to the show.
Hey, Si.
I won't say guinea pig, pilot episode of The Music Instinct. So thank you so much for being on the show. So full disclosure before we start, we have a musical history. I was just explaining off camera that I can't actually remember how we met. Somehow we were in a band together. Somehow we were recording songs. Sometime in the distance. I'm not sure if you have...
Just before the Sydney Olympics.
Sydney Olympics?
Just before.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I could not place it. I just remember being in a little studio in Petersham, writing songs.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we're on stage. So obviously a lot of time has passed since then. Back then you were a musician, songwriter, I mean, well-accomplished career, you've had labels, you've toured, done all those things. Obviously now we're sitting in your studio. Can you tell me a little about that transition? I mean, you've got a lot of titles now. I mean, producer, engineer, songwriter, musician, teacher. I mean, is there something you identify with in terms of titles? Does one of those fit better?
Yeah, I think it's what would you like to have maybe on your epitaph if you're not sort of burnt off into the atmosphere when we go. It's just musician. I think there's a lot of people who use the label producer now, and I think it's a different label than it would have been 25, 30 years ago.
Definitely, yeah.
Whereas now you can have a microphone and a laptop and you're a producer. You know, like I think somebody's producing music and it doesn't really matter of what kind of music that is. But I think so, producer, but mainly musician, I think.
Musician's the core. Which is what you've always been throughout that career. I mean, I guess that's core to who you are. But I guess, sitting in a studio, it's like obviously what you're doing day to day now within that musicianship has changed. And so can you talk a little bit about the transition to studio? I mean, what made you go down that path? And
I think when I started like playing with tapes in about 1973, Dad had a reel-to-reel, like it was an 8-track, like a 1/4 inch, and he'd sort of like just transfer his favourite records on there so he could have, Glenn Miller playing non-stop for 3 hours, kind of thing. And he sort of like taught me how to do that, and then I'd get together with mates when VHS first came in, and we'd sort of like make stupid videos and dub jokes over the TV ads, and things like that. And then I bought a little Tascam 244, like a cassette thing with 4 tracks, and you'd record your little drum or percussion bit, your guitar and your vocal, then you'd have to bounce them to track 4 and then come back and you have 3 more tracks, and and eventually it just sounded like absolute garbage because you'd sort of like bounced so many times. And to have a real studio in the 80s or the 90s would have cost you $250,000.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I had a couple of years off at the end of the 90s, which was 96, 97, 98, I went in and I was a programmer for Compaq and HP. And then I sort of went into the corporate environment, had the haircut, donned the suit and everything like that, travelling to North Sydney every day and back. And what I found was that part of my soul had been ripped out and I really needed to get back to the music.
Right.
So I came back to the music and all of a sudden tape had gone.
Okay.
And then we met up and we recorded an album with an earlier version of Cubase with you guys at the helm, and down at Summer Hill.
With the trains going past?
With trains going past, we'll dub that bit out. And then somebody from America writes and goes, I like the album, but there's that train in the background on track 3. Like, did you mean that? I was a sample. Yeah. But so it was like a really, really fun thing. And I think we were quite proud at the time around the turn of the century to be able to say, well, we've created an album at home with software.
Yes, which today everybody does, and it seems like a common thing. But back then, that was a mission.
It was a big thing.
Yeah, it was a big change.
And I mean, I know, say, Trevor Rubin from Yes had done it in 1993, 94 with the Talk album, and we'll talk probably more about them later, but they'd sort of like got 12 Apple 2CXs at $4,000 a pop. And they were tried, and they got an album done in 94. So that was within 5-6 years of that.
Yeah.
We were doing it, and so we were sort of like, it was pretty cutting edge, but a lot of people were about to start there. And now it's amazing, you know, what people sort of do in their car at lunchtime on a laptop. You know, you hear some great albums. Look at Gautier, what he's done in his bedroom, you know, like... and so when I opened the studio here, which was, I think we built it in 2006, it was built for really Sideshow Annie, because we couldn't keep going to where we were going and paying a lot of money to get it recorded elsewhere. And we were sort of at a point where it was interesting. It was sort of a lot more affordable. And I think a group of us, of mates, were all interested in, let's pop the mic there instead of straight in the sound hole of a guitar. And all of a sudden we started to get interested and a bit geeky about things like that. And it was really, really interesting. And now, in that 15 years since we've done that, you now look up how you can EQ a kick drum, and there's 30 videos on YouTube about how to do it.
It's almost overwhelming.
Which is fantastic. So I think the means of production have gone into the hands of the musician now. But now is, with that power comes the great responsibility of now you've got to write the song, and you've got to mix it, potentially master it, release it, market it. And so there's a lot more even footing there, but still, I think in the traditional sort of outlets, you know, like radio and TV, there's always the bastion of the old guard. You know, they're still recycling what they were playing in 1983 kind of thing. And with the voice, you know, it's the same faces.
Well, they're industry people, most of them.
That's right, And it's sort of like they're made to keep everybody else out, so that they've made their investment on making person X a star, and they want to keep them there for 40 years. So everybody else just... And so... You know, and if we get played on one of the commercial radio stations here, which they don't let any new songs in, no matter how good it is. And that's one of the frustrations is the directors from those shows really want to say to the musician, well, we're going to be playing, beaming this around Australia or around the world, and will it sell that Coca-Cola or that toothpaste? If it's not something people are wanting, and won't sell a product immediately and easily, it's too hard. You know, so we're sort of, I think one of the things is having this studio is having to learn all those skills and being able to help some friends and maybe clients at the same time. Sort of like started in 2006, 2007 to record our band and maybe a couple of friends, you know, like, and then it turned into a commercial thing. But now when we started open in the mountains, it was 5 studios here, and we got a lot of work. And then now there's 55.
It seems like there's an explosion of studios.
And that's not counting the people who actually just have their laptop and a microphone, set of headphones, and are doing some really, really cool stuff. You know, at the same time, you look at anybody, whether it's from London or whoever, and are doing EDM now. And now you're talking like a full second generation of people who want to go old school, and they bring in Dad, and Dad's pulling in his loops and this and that. And I'm thinking now it's actually 3 generations since people would naturally, as a young person, bring in a guitar to the equation. And I heard an interesting podcast about that disparity between people using loops and samples, which are totally valid for that awesome music. And then there's musicianship. And the musicians sometimes feel a little out of their depth with the technology, and the EDM people and the hip-hop people feel totally at home with it. And they then sometimes, at some stage in their career as well, go, wow, it'd be nice to be able to play a bit of guitar and a bit of wah-wah and put it in, and all of a sudden there's that melding
Yes, yeah.
of the old and the new, which is the evolution of it.
Yeah.
Which is so exciting.
A great example of that would be Red Hot Chili Peppers with Dead Mouse producing their album. So you've got that EDM coming in, bringing that, going to organic sounds. So I think it's interesting that, it looks like today's musician has to have a lot more skills in their kit bag. I mean, they've got to work the computer, they've got to know a DAW, they've got to know all these things.
Yeah.
But that can be a distraction from just getting into the performance and learning the instruments or learning the craft. So do you see the role of the studio filling some of that gap? I mean, what kind of role do you see? I mean, obviously the clients can vary, but what sort of work is coming into the studio? What are people looking for, do you think? I mean, especially with an explosion of studios that we're seeing, is that people who've got gear and just think they can monetize it, or is there a genuine need there for something that you just are lacking on your own?
If I was building a studio now in 2020, I would lower my expectations of being able to have third-party jobs coming in.
Right.
Because there's so many other ways and so many people can do a lot at home now. Whereas there is still a great group of people out there who don't want to worry about the technical side. They go, I want to get my song down in the most efficient way possible. And I don't want to be going, set up, cue, 3 bars, lead in, run into the other room, put the headphones on and go for it, or set up Wi-Fi and have it running from an iPad, and all that extra layer of complexity that all of a sudden 2 hours have passed and you haven't even got a basic track down.
Yep.
Whereas in a studio, you sort of expect that you go in, you go, hey dudes, how's it going? And the microphone's already set up. It's like, okay, what sort of beat we after as a guide track kind of thing to build this up? Or the microphone's already set. We don't have to really think. The engineer knows what is the most appropriate microphone for the particular voice. You know, the hard, soft thing.
Even having access to it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, so if somebody wants to come here, you know, like, well, you can go down to, you know, an electronics shop and buy a $100 condenser mic. Yeah, you'll get different varied results and sometimes quite suitable results. At the same time, there's certain advantages to a $7,000 Neumann microphone. You know, it's a lower noise floor. If the vocal's very exposed in a song, that's where those kind of microphones shine, and in the detail they provide. And that they're still here and you're buying them secondhand on the market 30, 40, 50 years later.
Yeah.
You know, the U87s and things like that. Whereas I think a lot of the budget condenser mics, I don't know whether you'd be selling those secondhand as rare as hen's teeth in 40 years from now.
No, I think that'd be the entry level, or they're just something you pass down generation to your next kids who.
That's probably built into your iWatch.
It's like, it's like the old iPhone. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's interesting to see where they go. I mean, we have this generation now that haven't even heard the Beatles, but what I've noticed is there is this explosion on particularly Instagram of amazing musicians. I mean, guitarists that are doing things we've never even seen before. I mean, you think of the Jimi Hendrixes and things. They're doing amazing performance pieces and they can get it straight on Instagram. But they're not necessarily spending their time in the studio and learning that, because that's a skill that takes away from what they're doing. So I mean, in the terms of the nature of the clients that come in, is it varied, or is there a particular regular type of thing that someone's looking for? Is it access to those mics, or is it?
I think a lot of young bands would sort of like, for the most part, there's going to be one of them who has a bit of a setup at home. So they'll probably go that way unless they want to be seen to be in a big studio and spend megabucks like $200-300 an hour to go into the city of Sydney and go to one of the usual suspects, the biggest studios, and be seen to be in the big drum room. And, you know, it's nice and glamorous. It's like people who go across to and record in Sun Studios. You know, they're like the little corner shop in wherever Elvis did his stuff, and you know, in the day it sells women's dresses, and then in the evening they move them out on trolleys and put a couple of microphones in and go, this is where Elvis did his thing. So it's like a tourist trick. You know, like, and people love and go, I recorded my album at Sun Studios or whatever, and that's fantastic, you know. Or you know, there's a certain credibility, like it's like a consumable,
Yeah.
kind of like a branding kind of thing. Whereas the studio now, I think part of the thing is that we're able to record our band, we're able to do stuff for movies, TV shows, and Jill and I can get a call at sort of like 7 o'clock in the morning, say, we need a piece of music or a song for this short film. It's going to Trop Fest or whatever. Happens all the time. And somebody calls and we say, well, when do you need it by? And they say, we need it by lunchtime. And we need it written, recorded, and mastered, and in the right format for film.
Yep.
By lunchtime, and we can do that here.
Yeah.
And we do that, and so we shortlisted, I think, for Trop Fest, the top 16 out of 780 submissions.
Okay. That's fantastic.
So it was really, really good. So, but we get to it, and it's taken practice. Like the first couple of things we put out were a little bit, how's your father? And I think that's part of the learning.
Yeah.
And you work with people, and you get good feedback, and you say, well, somebody goes, the bass doesn't really have to be that loud.
Come on, you're talking to me. Of course it does.
So, and then, just little tricks you learn along the way of you've been doing it for a couple of years and all of a sudden you mix, you go, it still sounds woolly, and then you realise that most mics have like a little bit of a, and when they're micing an instrument or a voice, have that 450, 500 hertz kind of build-up that unnaturally builds up over a song of 100 tracks or 20 tracks, and so if you start to carve out like a sculpture, if you, some of the greatest albums of all time, I'm sure if you went in and you soloed, that sample or that great rhythm guitar in the verse or something like that, you'd go, oh wow, it actually needs a bit more bass or something like that. But in the mix, in the bigger scheme of things, it's been sculpted to fit because the bass and the kick drum are looking after the bass. The guitar's just got to do that diddle-a-ding kind of thing. It doesn't really have to sound bigger than God by itself. It needs to fit in with the others. It's a team effort,
And I think that's
one of the things to learn.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's what the studio brings, because we can go to YouTube, we can look at these things, but you've got to surf through so much information, and it takes time. And I mean, if you're a young musician, you're just learning your craft, how much time do you want to devote to the recording and production versus getting on with the song?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's definitely something that is still needed, and I think we've seen this explosion, so which is why I was curious, because obviously there's studios popping up everywhere, and I think people go, I've bought the gear, now I want to make some money back, but it's not as simple as doing that, and it's a big commitment to get that to something that is as good. It sounds like if you can do post-production for videos straight out of the box, that's just something that was never achievable before.
No, that's right.
Yeah. So,
and there's also the thing of like, I feel very, very comfortable if somebody comes in and they're of any level of experience, right from a seasoned professional brass section through to a singer-songwriter who's just starting on their journey. I feel pretty confident that for every hour they spend in the studio, I'm able to actually value add and go, why don't we try singing a third on that harmony? Or why don't we pop in something that really accentuates the light and shade between the verse and the chorus from a arranging and songwriter's perspective. So the studio is not just a bunch of expensive equipment and boxes and microphones. It's actually you and I sitting in there and saying, well, you know what? This chorus needs to pop. So then what we do is we then make sure everything lines up. And so when it hits that first beat, it's sort of like, I have arrived, you know, and tricks you learn along the way, and that tricks that, as running a studio, that you probably wouldn't do things the same way as you did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I remember Bob Clearmountain when he was talking about that great album, Avalon, that he did for Roxy Music.
Yeah.
He said, if I did it again now, this was a while back, but he said, I wouldn't use so much reverb. And I think that was interesting because that was one of the most beautiful things was the atmosphere of that album
Yep.
with Avalon and More Than This and all those kind of. You could close your eyes, put the headphones on, and walk amongst the musicians in this tapestry of just beautiful audio.
I mean, he created a soundscape that's been emulated for that decade. So,
that's right.
If he took that reverb away, we probably all wouldn't have bought lexicons and push the sliders up trying to do the same thing. But yeah, and I mean, he probably didn't think at the time he was shaping the sound of sort of how things would sound, which a sound we're hearing again now. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of reverb. There's a lot of throwback to that 80s, late 70s now, even in some of the music that's coming out today, which is fantastic. But
there was a reaction, wasn't there? Like
there was,
during the 90s, of I don't want any reverb on my voice.
Completely dry.
Like, and it's sort of like it seemed to be when that pendulum swings sometimes there's too much and sometimes there's not enough. But there's that thing of it's a tool.
Yep.
It shouldn't be like we're going to build a table, but we're not going to use. You're not allowed to use chisels.
No.
Like, okay, off to IKEA we go.
Yeah. And I think that all comes back to the producer. I mean, that's the role of producer for you in the studio. It's knowing how to make that pop. I mean, doesn't matter. Your laptop's not going to tell you how to do that. And I mean, yes, you can learn that, but it's experience. It's having a catalogue of knowledge of songs in your head that you can bring to artists to just say, and just sometimes that alternate perspective. You can get very much in your own head inside of that process that's from songwriting all the way to recording to mastering. Sometimes you just need that second opinion that says, hang on, I'm hearing this.
Yeah. You know, like when you've got a singer in and they've been through the 3-minute song, and by the last chorus it should be at the peak, but they're going at the end of the marathon kind of thing. And all you got to do is just, part of the thing about being the studio person is, hey, that was great. We're going to do the last chorus just by itself. We'll drop you in.
Yeah.
And just have a glass of water. And this one, we're going to go bang, bang, bang. And then try it again. And you go, that was really, really good. We'll keep that one. But I want you to do one and just have fun with it this time.
Yeah.
And then somebody can, and all of a sudden you find that it's that one that actually had the one or two bits that really sparkle. And you go, we wouldn't have got that if we were just sitting at home. Yeah. Or, you know what I mean? Like
I mean, I was going to say that's the other angle is the performance that you get from the studio, having someone producing there telling you that's the best take, that you don't necessarily know yourself. And as many takes as you want, you still need somebody to go, that was it. That's the one. That's the the money shot. Yeah.
And you're outside the fishbowl.
Yes.
Whereas when you're the singer-songwriter, you're sort of like, you're basically wed to so many of the aspects of that song that sometimes for an engineer or producer to say, not turn around and say that sucked, but to say, oh, come on, you could do better.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's reframing it so that the person feels more confident in themselves and they can work it, like rather than, I mean, if you're doing something, some EDM or trance or hip hop or something like that, it's to say, well, come on, that's a little bit. Eminem would have done that in 1997. You can do better.
Yes.
There's new tools. There's new ways of doing
sample.
it. Yeah. That's and one of the things I found is it's just never ever say, oh, you sound like so and so. You know what I mean? Like whether it's Eminem or Bon Jovi or whoever, it's like you've got to pull that comparison because that debilitates people's egos.
Yes.
Is when, or fills them full of crap and they go, oh, they think they're Stevie Nicks. All of a sudden, you know what I mean? Like you've got to be able to filter it and say, look, I like the huskiness, that approach in there. Can you do that a little bit more? And, rather than just accepting the performance as it is. Oh, that'll do.
That'll do.
I'll fix them a little bit harder.
Fix it in the mix.
Yeah, that's right. And it's that classic thing. You can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter.
But as an engineer too, the last thing you want is a project that's got 40 vocal tracks because they just kept layering them down and said, well, the engineer will fix it and find the best take. You got to find, somebody's got to dig through all that and find those things. So sometimes pushing for that performance is really going to get the best result. Even if they worked a little harder and they didn't want to, but sometimes that's what comes through.
Totally.
Yeah.
One of my mates, Eddie Hansen, who I had who taught me a lot of what I know. He was a mastering engineer at EMI's 301 during the 1970s in Sydney. And he said he was given 8 guitars, like all through Marshalls for this Sydney band. And he said they'd been adding more and more and more guitars, and the song sounded smaller and smaller and smaller. And part of our job is sometimes to salvage a mix and just to peel away and find the essence and those 2 guitars that make it rock.
Yep.
You know? and then all of a sudden and you look at AC/DC and it's that. It's not that wall of sound
Left
that
and right.
Phil Spector was doing. Yep. It's really, really, even the drummer is going da-da-da,
Yep.
do-da-do. You know, it's not you know, kind of thing. And we're saying, hold back. How many toms do you need to bring in for this session? And then often, most of the time, the drummer says, oh, actually, I didn't even hit the toms for the whole song.
Yeah. Take them off. Right.
We've saved 20 minutes.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something earlier about your father. I want to dig into that. I want to know, where do you think your musical instincts come from? Is there an early musical memory? He obviously had an influence, but can you go back further? Is there something you can recall?
Yeah. There was a piano at our place, my grandparents' place over at 30 Ocean Street, Bondi. And during the Second World War, all the ladies in the extended family, they all shacked up because all the husbands were off fighting in North Africa kind of thing. And so they'd had this piano and it had been used, and people would, instead of, you know, sort of going out to the club or the pub or anything on a Saturday night, the family would actually sing songs around the piano on a Saturday night. And my dad had always had that thing of, he loved the big band swing stuff of the 1930s and 40s, and, you know, so that had always been a big part of me growing up, was just sort of hearing these instruments. And then my great uncle was actually a guy called Ernie Davidson, and he was the first Australian to write a song and have it on the American Hit Parade.
Wow.
Which was in 1946. He wrote a song. He'd come back wounded from North Africa in the war, and he came back and penned a song called "Kiss, Kiss, Kissin' in the Corn," and it's sort of like it's twee. It really, really is. But then it was played by this band that make weird instruments out of, you know, brooms and old toilets and things, and they recorded this thing with all the 3-4 part barbershop quartet kind of harmonies, and it went into the top 10 in America. And then what's his name? I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas, that Bing Crosby, covered it.
Yeah.
And it's been covered, so that was sort of always in the back of our family, and that's gone to the National Museum in Canberra.
Okay.
Like, that there's that part of our family that has actually written hits. Like, when most Australians forever, really up until the 1970s, were always told, like, I look back at the Johnny O'Keefe stuff. Mum was mates with him back in the 1950s, and one of the things was, because they went to the same school, was that the record company would wait for the ship to arrive, then the latest single from America would You Make Me Want to Shout. They'd put it on and say, okay, now with Australian musicians and Johnny O'Keefe, you guys will now reproduce that song,
right,
and we'll sell it here with the Australian version of an American song.
Yeah.
So always Australians, up until the 1970s, really, we were always a bit starved for Australian music. And it was always this, we were sold the stuff from overseas, and there was a real lack of pride in our own stuff. And because there was also one of the things where we were always told that, well, most of the time, I think, and in my story as well, is that you can never be a musician. It's not a real job.
Yeah.
You should really, really be out and become an electronics engineer or do this, the real job thing, you know?
Yeah.
And that, how will you ever pay your mortgage or pay your way by strumming a guitar.
Yeah.
What a silly thought. You know?
I mean, our culture was almost imported back then. I mean, it was coming from other sources. I think even back then, they were still speaking in British accent on Australian television.
Yeah.
I think
If
there
you
was
wanted
a point.
spaghetti, you buy a tin of it.
Yeah. Spam, sir. But yeah, I think there was a point, I'm not sure where in either, I can't remember, but where we started speaking in an Australian sort of accent on television. That was a radical thing. So I think, our culture up to that point just didn't exist. It was sort of imitate what was overseas. Yeah.
Interesting you relate that, because there was that Australian show Underbelly, and they had was set, one of the sub-series was set with Tilly Devine and all the gangsters who were part of the bootlegging movement in the 1930s in Sydney, around East Sydney and King's Cross, etc., and Bondi, and all the music they used, they had to get 1980s songs by, I don't know, it was Icehouse and the Hoodoo Gurus and that, and they made them into, re-recorded them in a swing 30s style kind of thing. And that played in the background, and you're going, oh my God, that's Great Southern Land, but with a...
Okay. It's a great idea.
kind of thing. And it was an interesting take. So there was that, we had to go back and fill in the gaps we didn't have
We
then.
didn't have,
Because the
there's no catalog.
songwriters were going, you need a real job, mate. Here's
They're
some
working the
bricks.
mines.
Go and leave them. So, and to do this, if we talked to somebody like our parents 30, 40 years ago, they would have said, you're dreaming.
Yeah.
Like for us now, we've actually, it's possible to create a life beyond your wildest dreams out of music.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we've got to have that little governor in us that says, dream big, but stay realistic, that there will be a certain select number of faces that the public want to hear and see all the time.
Yeah.
And it's going to be hard beyond a certain point to crack that. So if you're going to do music and build a studio and write songs and, invest time and money and lots of resources and a chunk of your life into it, you probably want to love it.
Yeah. And you might need a day job.
Yeah. Often to pepper it, you know,
Well, I think the other thing that's interesting for Australia is just the population. I mean, touring. I mean, how do you take that? You make this piece of work, you create your song. You've only got so much audience that wants to see your face on television, but you've got this great divide between the states of just even touring and making a living. Whereas if you look at America, I mean, people can at least make some of that money by just traveling around. We just have that restriction. I mean, you end up eating noodles in a van, or which is what happens. So interesting. You said it sounds like there's nature in there in terms of where that music instinct comes from. So what do you think shaped your sound? And if you identify as a musician, I mean, is there something back there? Or
definitely. There was there was a particular sound that hit me. Like, I'd been buying records since the mid-70s, when you save up your pocket money and ride your bike up to the shop at the 2 suburbs away and buy a record and ride home with it, and then put it on and be scratched. And you'd have to take it back and wait 2 weeks for the next truck to arrive with the replacement. They'd give you a phone call on the landline and say, that was me. And whereas then, so I had some really cool early albums, like for me, in the mid-70s, that were my own choice and not mum or dad's, like Brian Ferry's Let's Stick Together album and Ebony Eyes by Bob Welsh. And anyway, and then we got a band together, and we'd one of my mates had his piece, so we'd all pile in his Kingswood and we'd drive to the rehearsal kind of thing, a couple of suburbs away. And our singer's dad had a carpet factory in Hornsby, and we'd sort of pile in there, and nobody could hear us for miles around, and it was a cassette my mate played that I went, this sounds big. This production sounds huge. And he was playing 90125 by Yes. And it was a Trevor Horn production. And I'd never heard, like I'd heard our band and I'd heard, AC/DC and stuff like that. But all of a sudden, the snare drum. The drums didn't sound like cardboard boxes anymore. They sounded like they were recorded in a castle. You know, they were grand. It was maybe even bombastic by today's standards, but it was something I'd never heard before. And then I did some reading and discovered that Trevor Horn would actually get poor Alan White to sit in there, and they would go to a castle or studios or wherever, and they'd put tea towels across all his drums and cymbals and leave the snare drum. And they go, okay, take one. And he'd go, psh, you know, with take two, let's undo the tom one, you know, and they would go, and they were after that great separation, which was, you don't get that nice sympathetic resonance of the hit.
Yeah.
But for that sound, if you listen to like Slave to the Rhythm, Crazy by Seal, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, you know, those were all Trevor Horn productions. Video Killed the Radio Star.
Right.
And he's a really annoying perfectionist, apparently. But it was, I think, music production by the early 80s went somewhere else.
Yeah.
It just was no longer a couple of mics. You know, you look back to the first 2 or 3 Zeppelin albums, and you've got 3 mics on the drum kit. And you listen back and you go, I can hear it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not. I wouldn't do it like that now.
No.
And it actually sounds. I love Zeppelin, but the early recordings leave me wanting a bit.
Yeah.
You know, and I listen back, and especially because we're so spoilt for great sounds now, you listen to Gautier's.
Yeah.
You know, somebody that I used to know, and all of a sudden, just what he's done in his bedroom is like, it's crisp in the highs. It's present. It has beef. It's all there, and it wraps itself around your ears. Whereas the Zeppelin thing was more of a, what a great band is playing over there. A bit of a heavy stuff, and you know, like, and the singer goes really high with his voice. You know, and other things were secondary thoughts of how the quality of the tom sounds were. You know what I mean?
Yes,
it just and I think it became a science beyond the black box of it just you know what it had been previously.
Absolutely. I mean, the possibilities were kind of endless then at that point. It was the Fairlights, SSL desks. Technology had changed
like those
from
synths.
Get a great sound with a bunch of mics in a room to now we have all these tools that do all these things we'd never even thought of.
Yeah. And then that funny thing happened by the late 80s. You had, say, John Cougar Mellencamp came along and almost single-handedly, apparently, revived the real drum sounds.
Back to the roots,
And all of a sudden people went, well, the technology has actually come to so far, now we can get really good drum sounds and we know what they probably should sound like.
Yeah.
And they were able to do a hybrid thing, and then the 90s came and it was a lot of reaction, and especially with the hip-hop and the rap thing, pushing stuff away from, not everybody needs a guitar anymore to have a cool song. And that's a good thing.
Yep.
Because we've got to admit, probably by the end of every era, if you sort of chunk it like that, people start to put out some real crap.
Yeah.
You know, and it's all just derivative, cookie cutter template on what somebody's done before. And that's one of the dangers about, I was listening to a podcast by some London producers yesterday, and they were talking about where we use samples and or loops, that these people are creating these great libraries, these great big producers that are really, really popular. But at the same time, then the next gen of producers are buying that box set of sounds.
Yeah.
And everybody goes, oh, that's the sound that we heard on. And it's all just downstream. It's trying to sit downstream of Bob Dylan trying to write a good lyric. It's like, you should really probably come up with something of your own. Because he's outfished that river.
Yeah.
You know?
I get you.
And so all those sounds, by the time they get in the box, whether it's real music or whatever, is just, we've just got to try and develop our own voice. And at some stage in this new hybrid technology, it's going to come from sometimes that little mistake that you or I make and go, oh, that was
a happy accident.
Yeah, the happy accident.
Yeah.
And that sometimes comes from treating the studio as not so much the traditional place where you would go to record, but treat this these few couple of rooms in this studio as the instrument.
Yeah, absolutely. All
You
right.
know?
So on that note, we should listen to some music. Something old, something new, borrowed, or you. Can you tell me a little about what we're going to listen to?
Sure. This one's a bit of a weird one. It's actually
We like weird.
called the Emperor RX.
Okay.
And in the 700-year-old tradition of the tarot, RX signifies a card that is flipped
Okay.
upside down. And often that can have quite gnarly connotations. And there is, I've been doing a series for the International Tarot Association.
Okay.
For part of learning more about a particular card for people who were doing it for different reasons. And a lot of the way I see the use of the cards is to become a better person. How to see, well, what may I be missing in my rearview mirror, whether it's envy, jealousy, or these other things that often come up. Now, the Emperor came up, and I really, really wanted to embody what an emperor gone wrong is musically.
Yeah.
And so I just happened to come across a funny accident, and it's sort of, here it is, the Emperor reversed.
Okay.
So you can sort of hear there's a little bit of part of my brief was dissonance.
Dissonance. Yeah. Yeah, I can hear that. Yeah.
Feeling on edge, and sounds in there like marching armies and planes coming in for bomb drops and things like that when the Emperor goes wrong.
Yeah.
And you know, the 20th century, we've got your Stalins, your Hitlers,
Yeah.
Pol Pot, all these people who supposedly were meant to be nurturing the people they're ruling to serve, serving to rule. But then when it goes wrong, all of a sudden the whole thing just becomes something that on its head, you know. And anyway, that's what I was trying to embody with that.
So are these chants? Are these meditations? Are they?
Sometimes they're up to 20-minute meditations.
Yeah.
Some of them are very, very peaceful, sort of ambient, new age style. I try and avoid that word, new age, because it sort of evokes the 80s. Everything's going to be beautiful and bright and fluffy kind of thing, which life isn't.
No.
Life has that dark edge to it.
Yeah.
And I think, like every card has a reverse, we're able to, there's a happy version of the Emperor.
Right.
And a very, very classically inspired movement that's more along the lines of Bach.
Yes.
That has strings in there and things, and it sort of, and there'll be like a 3-minute part that is used for what we call gated tarot spreads. A gated tarot spread is where we spread some cards for a particular issue that's going on in somebody's life.
Okay.
And you're not allowed to do the second part of the spread until the objective that has been agreed upon has been nailed. So it might be in 3 days' time we then do the next part.
You do it again. Yeah,
so the person must go and talk to the boss about an issue. Once that's done, we then have the next step in the process.
Wow.
And so we do those through the Tarot Association, and we've got about 75,000 members. And and these are all readers, all tarot readers around the world. And they'll come into these virtual rooms and meditate upon the meaning of a certain set of cards.
Right. Okay.
It's like piecing together a story, and the music can help evoke sometimes the emotions or the things that need to be done to rectify a situation.
And that's a pretty interesting position to be, to translate something that's, a piece of art, it's a card, it's got an image, but that image is altered, and there's so many meanings around that card over the history. You've got to translate that into something that's emotional. Which is quite amazing.
So that piece goes for 7 minutes. Some of them go up to 20.
Yeah.
Some of them are designed just for a meditation session.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, like, but it depends upon the brief. You know, so there's a over 170 pieces of music coming into that project.
Wow. Okay.
You know?
That keeps the studio going, and I mean, that really justifies all of
And
this.
we do about one or two a week.
Okay. Fantastic.
So
Okay.
over the last year.
Wow, that's an amazing kind of direction to go from where your career's gone to where you are now, and sort of what you're doing in terms of studio. So thank you. So,
and so, especially having done, sometimes we do things for film and TV, is to be able to, you're given a brief, and sometimes we think, and we get writer's block, and I might be sitting there with a guitar going, well, there's that funny thing with, who's sang Maggie May, the Scottish singer?
Rod Stewart.
Rod Stewart, yeah. We've Rod Stewart, he's sort of been singing and writing songs for most of his life, and he says, well, what do I really sing a song about now? That the gardener didn't do a good job. Yeah. It comes a point, when you sort of move beyond that emotional time of your teens through to 35, that's a very emotionally charged time of your life. And you're ambitious or not ambitious, you're in love or not in love, having your heart ripped out, or, and all those things that happen in that time and so the music is very emotive from around that time. Whereas the music I'm writing now is more from, what's the lesson being for me? And how can I utilize the years that I have left to the best of my ability, rather than, I'm not going for a number one hit single. If that happened, wow, I mean, fantastic. But that is totally not my game. It's just that if some other people like the relaxing stuff I do, great.
Yep.
If some people like to dance to the dance stuff we do, great.
Yep.
If, and it's just sort of like, it's not, world domination is not on the radar.
Yeah.
and I think that can be a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
As soon as you remove that unhealthy carrot and you start doing it for the right reasons, that's that inside job, and we start to make better music.
Yes. Yeah.
And because then you've removed the constructs that we put in our head of what success is.
Yes.
Whether it could be a Beamer, a BMW, or the white picket fence and 3 kiddies. As soon as you get all that out of the way and you think, it's just right here, right now, what are we doing with this music? Am I enjoying it? Or am I expressing myself? Great. That's all.
Yep.
Doesn't matter beyond that, And if something else happens, all well and good.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Awesome. Cool. Thanks for sharing. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I think we should wrap up soon, but before we go, we have to run through a little quiz. Yep. So I want to hit you with a couple of quick ones. So analog or digital?
Digital.
Fender or Gibson? That's a tough one.
Red Frog.
Red Frog. Acoustic or electric?
Electric.
Electric. Home recording or the studio? For you, it's both.
yeah, that's right.
Favourite bit of gear?
Favourite bit of gear? My ears.
Your ears. Fantastic. And best musical decade?
It was the best and worst was the 80s.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. A few stories there maybe for another...
For me,
Yeah, a few stories there for maybe another time.
Yeah, yeah.
Eliot, thank you so much for coming on the show, being my pilot guest. It's been absolutely fantastic. Hopefully we can do this again sometime. Links will be in the description for how to find out more about SongCave and find out more about yourself, Sideshow Annie, and the work you're doing. And until next time.
Thanks, Si.
Cheers.